The Alpha King rejected her and watched as a rival Alpha claimed her before the entire kingdom. The High Kingdom of Lufer had stood for centuries, ruled by kings whose claws were sharp, their wills sharper. Yet none were as feared or as admired as Kael Ironfang, the Alpha King, whose name was spoken in hushed reverence across the land. His power was unmatched, his judgment absolute, and his loyalty to tradition unwavering. Beneath his rule the kingdom flourished, though whispers of dark omens still lingered like shadows under the moonlight. On the night of the moon choosing, the court was alive with anticipation. Candles lined the marble halls, their flickering flames casting long dancing shadows on the walls. Nobles adorned in velvet and silk murmured in anxious tones. The moon throne, carved from black obsidian and engraved with silver runes, glimmered like a star fallen to the earth. Tonight the king would choose his queen, a woman whose bloodline would cement his reign, whose presence would balance the delicate power of the Alphas. Yet Kael's heart carried a weight that no ceremony could lift. There was one presence in the court he could not ignore. One shadow among the noble faces that drew his gaze like a magnet. Lyra Vale, a young woman of humble birth, stood near the edge of the hall, her eyes wide and trembling. She had come not out of expectation, but out of destiny. The elders whispered of her cursed lineage, the eclipse curse, an omen that could bring ruin or transformation to any throne it touched. Kael's advisors had warned him in no uncertain terms. "Do not let her step near the moon throne, your majesty," one had said. "Her blood carries the eclipse. It could unbalance the kingdom, even destroy it." But Kael had seen something in her, a flicker of light behind her fear, a strength wrapped in fragility. And in the quiet moments when no one was watching, he felt it. The pull of a bond older than law, older than duty. It was a sensation that left his chest tight and his mind restless. The ceremony began. Lyra was brought forward by the elders, her heart hammering in her chest, each step toward the throne echoing in her bones. The court fell silent as she approached. She was not adorned in silks or crowned in gold. She wore only the simple garb of her people, yet there was a quiet majesty about her, the kind that demanded attention without seeking it. Kael rose from the moon throne, his eyes like steel catching the candlelight. He studied her, noting every tremor of her hands, every flash of determination in her gaze. The bond between them thrummed beneath his skin, a warning he could not ignore, yet a temptation he could not resist. "Lyra Vale," he said, his voice carrying through the hall like a command. "You stand here because the elders claim your blood holds power. But power without control brings nothing but ruin. And this kingdom does not bend for ruin." Her lips parted, ready to speak, but Kael raised a hand, stopping her with the weight of his presence. "I cannot take you as my queen." The words were heavy, measured, final. A hush fell over the court, and the tension became almost unbearable. Lyra's chest tightened, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt. She had expected fear, perhaps even rejection. But not like this. Not so public, not so definitive. "But your majesty," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Enough," Kael said. His gaze softened, though only slightly, and he turned away, stepping back toward the throne. "Your destiny is not here. You are not meant to sit beside me. Your place is elsewhere." The court stirred, whispers rising like smoke. Some nobles smirked, relieved that the prophecy of disaster would be averted. Others looked on with concern, sensing the undercurrent of regret in Kael's tone. Lyra felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted. She was both furious and heartbroken, a storm of emotions roiling inside her. She had come seeking purpose, perhaps even acceptance, and instead she found only rejection. Her eyes burned, not with tears but with a sudden resolve. She would not be broken. If this kingdom refused her, she would find her own way to power. Then, as if the night itself had heard her unspoken vow, another presence entered the hall. The doors swung open with a force that rattled the candle sconces. A hush fell over the crowd once more, this time tinged with fear. Riven Blackmore, the exiled alpha of the Shadow Clans, strode into the hall with a confidence that demanded attention. His dark cloak trailed behind him like liquid night, his eyes piercing, ancient, knowing. He did not bow to the throne, nor did he pause before the elders. His gaze was fixed solely on Lyra, and the bond between them pulsed in response, as if acknowledging him as both threat and ally. Cale's jaw tightened. He had heard whispers of Riven's return, of his growing strength in exile. He had expected confrontation, perhaps even battle, but not here, not in the sacred moon hall. Riven knelt before Lyra, his voice calm, deliberate. "I claim her," he said, and the words were more than a challenge. They were a promise. "By right of the old laws, by the blood that runs in her veins, I claim her as my bond." Shock rippled through the hall like a sudden storm. Nobles whispered of treason, of law being broken before their eyes. Yet Lyra did not flinch. She felt the surge of power beneath Riven's words, a recognition that this bond, though dangerous, offered something Kale could not, something deeper. Kale's chest tightened in a way he had never known. He had rejected her to protect the kingdom, to follow duty and law, but in doing so he had unleashed a storm he could not control. And in that moment, as Riven took her hand, he realized that the bond had not broken. It had only grown stronger, tethering them together across the chasm of choice and consequence. Lyra allowed herself to be led forward by Riven. She did not look away from Kale, even as the crowd watched her leave. There was no fear in her eyes now, only a quiet determination, a spark that promised transformation, challenge, and the unknown. Kale's hand twitched, the urge to reach for her almost irresistible, but he did not move. He could not yet. The laws, the kingdom, his pride, all held him back. Yet beneath the armor of duty, something fragile and human cracked. For the first time in his life he felt powerless. As Lyra disappeared through the doors, escorted by the rival Alpha, the air seemed to thrum with tension. The moon throne felt colder than ever, the shadows stretching longer. Kale remained where he stood, his gaze fixed on the empty hall, knowing that the events of this night would shape more than the kingdom. They would shape him and her in ways neither could yet understand. The whispers of the court grew louder, but Kale did not hear them. He felt only the pull of the bond, the ache of the choice, and the realization that the woman he had rejected was not lost. She had merely begun a journey that he could no longer control. Outside, the night was dark and still. The moon hung low, silver and mournful, as if watching the drama unfold from above. The eclipse curse, dormant for so long, stirred in response to the bond between them. It whispered through the trees, across the mountains, and into the hearts of all who lived under its shadow. Lyra walked beside Riven, her mind a whirlwind of fear, defiance, and newfound strength. She was aware of the court's eyes upon her, but her attention was elsewhere. She felt the pulse of the land, the echo of power within her veins, and the unspoken promise that her story was only beginning. And Kale remained behind, on the moon throne, staring into the darkness of the hall. The weight of his crown felt heavier than ever. The choice he had made to reject her had preserved the law, but had it preserved him? He did not know the answer, but he did know one thing. This night had changed everything. The kingdom, the prophecy, the bond between them, it all had shifted. And somewhere in the shadows a storm was gathering, ready to sweep them both into a world they could not yet see. The night of choosing had ended, but the story had only just begun. The Shadow Dominion was unlike anything Lyra had ever imagined. A land of deep forest and silver mist, where the moon seemed to hang closer to the earth, casting long silver shadows over jagged cliffs and winding rivers. The people of the Shadow Clans watched her arrival with wary eyes. They were strong, silent, and proud, like wolves shaped by darkness and storm. Riven led her through the heart of the Dominion, his presence commanding yet careful. He did not treat her as a prize or possession, nor did he try to force her into fear. Instead, he walked beside her, letting her sense the weight of power he carried and the space he allowed for her own. "You must understand," Riven said, his voice low but steady. "This land does not bow to kings of the sun. Here, the moon rules, and the moon does not tolerate weakness." Lyra listened, her mind racing. She had feared him at first, his dark aura and sharp eyes making her pulse quicken. But now, walking beside him, she began to see a different side. He was fierce, yes, but disciplined, stern, yet not unkind. And in that contrast, she felt a strange sense of safety. This place is alive," he said softly, her fingers brushing against the silver mist that hung thick in the air. "It feels like it knows me."
It does. It knows every soul who comes into its embrace.
"It recognizes those with fire in their blood. You are not ordinary, Lyra. The eclipse curse flows in your veins, yes, but it is not only a curse. It is power waiting to awaken." Lyra's heart beat faster. For years she had been told her blood was dangerous, that she was a burden or an omen of disaster. But here, Ribbon spoke of it as something different, something she could shape, rather than be destroyed by. Her first days in the Shadow Dominion were filled with lessons and trials. Ribbon guided her through the forests and mountains, teaching her to listen to the land, to feel the pull of magic in the water, the trees, even the wind. Lyra discovered abilities she never knew she had. Visions that hinted at events to come, whispers of power in her hands, strength in her legs, and yet, even as she grew stronger, she could not stop thinking of Kale. His rejection haunted her. She remembered the cold steel in his eyes, the finality of his words, and yet the pull of the bond lingered. She did not understand it, but she could not deny it. Even Riven's presence, though comforting and protective, could not erase Kale from her thoughts. One evening, as the silver mist clung to the trees and the moon rose high and full, Lyra sat at the edge of a cliff overlooking the Dominion. Riven approached quietly, stopping beside her without breaking the silence. "You think of him," he said simply. Lyra's eyes did not leave the horizon. "I cannot help it," she admitted. "Even after everything, even after he rejected me, he matters." Riven studied her, his expression unreadable. "Then you must understand one thing," he said finally. "Your destiny is yours, Lyra, not his, not mine. We can guide you, teach you, protect you, but you must choose who you are and who you will become. Only then can the bond, whatever it is, find its true place." Lyra felt the weight of his words settle over her. He spoke not as a rival, nor as a king, but as someone who understood power and its cost. She nodded silently, feeling both fear and determination. Days turned into weeks, and the Shadow Dominion began to accept her. The people called her the Moonbound Queen, not because she had been claimed, but because of the aura of magic and command she radiated. Even the elders who had once doubted her began to watch her with cautious respect. She learned to speak in councils, to move with grace through the night forests, to wield her newfound powers with precision. But messages from Lufar still reached her through the wind and secret messengers. She learned that her absence had thrown Chaos Kingdom into subtle chaos. Crops failed in unusual patterns, alliances with neighboring realms began to falter, and whispers of rebellion stirred in the north. She realized with a sharp pang in her chest that her rejection had consequences far beyond her own heartbreak. Kael, meanwhile, felt the pull of the bond more strongly with each passing night. Though he had refused her, though he had turned away to protect his kingdom, he could not escape the ache in his chest. He dreamt of her face, her eyes, her quiet strength, and he could feel her growing power across the lands, a force that was both frightening and irresistible. One night, unable to sleep, Kael stood on the balcony of the moon throne, staring at the horizon where the Shadow Dominion lay cloaked in silver mist. His mind replayed the moon choosing endlessly, the moment he rejected her, and the moment Riven claimed her. His heart clenched at the memory. He understood now that his decision, made out of fear and duty, had not protected the kingdom. It had shifted the balance of power entirely. In the Dominion, Lyra's power continued to grow. She learned to harness the Eclipse curse not as a chain, but as a bridge between light and shadow, fear and strength, past and future. Her visions became clearer, revealing paths that intertwined Kale, Riven, and herself in ways she could not yet understand. She saw the potential for war, for transformation, and for choices that could alter the fate of kingdoms. Riven watched her closely, offering guidance but never overstepping. He saw her pain, her longing, her desire for understanding. And he saw the bond that drew her, invisibly, to Kale. He did not speak of it often, but he knew that the Alpha King remained a part of her story, whether Lyra admitted it or not. The first time Lyra confronted the reality of that bond, she was practicing her magic in a secluded glade. The trees were tall and silent, the moonlight filtering through their branches. She extended her hand toward the shadows, and they moved, twisting and bending to her will. Then she felt it, a pull, strong and insistent. Not Riven's, not hers, but Kale's. It tugged at her heart and mind, a reminder that the bond had never truly broken. She faltered, dropping her hand. The energy scattered, leaving her breathless. What? Why does it pull me to him still? Riven appeared silently, his dark eyes calm but intense. Because some bonds are older than fear, he said. Older than choice. They do not bend to rejection or pride. They wait, patient as the moon until both sides are ready, or until they force their own way. Lyra shivered at his words. She did not fully understand them, but she felt their truth deep in her bones. The bond between her and Kale was not simply a connection of desire or duty. It was something more. Something primal and enduring. Something that would demand recognition when the time came. Weeks later, the Dominion faced its first test. A small band of rebels from the northern clans, jealous of Riven's return and wary of Lyra's growing influence, challenged her claim. The night erupted into chaos, with shadows twisting, metal clashing, and voices shouting under the silvered moon. Lyra stood at the center of it all, fear and determination intertwining. She did not fight like a girl who had been rejected. She fought like a queen, commanding the wind, the shadows, and the very forest around her. Her power flowed through her, controlled yet wild, and the rebels quickly found themselves overwhelmed. When the fight ended, Lyra stood in the clearing, the mist curling around her like a cloak. Her chest heaved with exhaustion, but her eyes shone with triumph. Riven approached, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You have grown stronger," he said simply. "Stronger than anyone imagined." Lyra allowed herself a small, tired smile. "I am still learning," she admitted. "Still trying to understand everything." Riven nodded, his expression softening. "And that is why you will survive. Why you will rule. Why you will be remembered." But even in the moment of victory, Lyra felt the pull once more. The tug of the bond with Kale, distant but unyielding. She knew that her story with him was far from over, that the rejection, the rivalry, and the complicated emotions were threads that would not easily untangle. Across the lands, Kale sat in the quiet of the moon throne, staring at the northern horizon. The wind carried the faintest whisper of power, of movement in the shadows, of Lyra's growing strength. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that the bond between them had not faded. It had only grown stronger. The winds over Lufar howled like restless spirits, carrying whispers of fear and uncertainty. From the moon throne, Kale Ironfang watched the horizon, restless and unsettled. The High Kingdom was crumbling, not from rebellion alone, but from a shadow that spread quietly yet relentlessly. Crops failed, rivers shifted, and the loyalty of his nobles began to falter. He knew why. Lyra Vale, the girl he had rejected, now ruled the Shadow Dominion. Her name was spoken across both lands, not as a threat, not as a child of prophecy, but as a queen who commanded respect, even fear. And the bond between them, invisible yet undeniable, tugged at his heart. Cale had spent weeks wrestling with his own pride, his duty, and the unspoken pull of the connection that bound them. Every night he dreamed of her eyes, of the quiet strength that had drawn him in before, and that still haunted him now. He had rejected her to protect the kingdom, yet he had only made himself weaker. Finally, he decided he could wait no longer. Not for the kingdom, not for pride, not for fear. He would cross into the Shadow Dominion not as a conqueror, but as a man searching for truth. Riven, aware of Cale's approach long before he arrived, met him at the border, standing beneath the twisted silver trees that marked the boundary between their lands. The exiled Alpha's dark eyes regarded Cale like a storm assessing the sky, silent, sharp, and inevitable. "You should not have come," Ribbon said, his voice steady but edged with warning. "You are walking into a land that does not bow to kings of the sun." Cale did not flinch. "I do not come as a king," he said, his tone low, almost humble. "I come as a man who must face what he rejected. I cannot ignore her, not any longer." Riven's eyes narrowed. "You speak of her as if she is yours to claim," he said. "Do not mistake history for destiny. You cannot command her, Cale Ironfang. She is no longer a child to be chosen. She is a queen." Cale's jaw tightened. "I do not wish to command her. I only wish to see her and speak." Riven regarded him for a long moment, then nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of Cale's courage, or perhaps his desperation. "Then, follow me," he said. They traveled through the forests under a sky streaked with silver mist. The shadows seemed to bend and shift around Lyra, as if the land itself recognized her presence. When they arrived at the heart of the Dominion, the moonlight struck her fully, bathing her in silver. She was not merely a girl standing beside an exiled Alpha. She was a queen, luminous and unyielding, her power evident even in silence. Lyra's eyes fell on Cale, and for a heartbeat the world paused. The bond between them thrummed violently, almost painfully, across the distance. Neither spoke at first. The weight of their shared history and unspoken emotions filled the air. Cale was the first to break the silence. "Lyra," he said, his voice rough with emotion, I came because I cannot undo what I did. I rejected you, and in doing so, I failed us both. I failed the kingdom, and perhaps I failed myself." Lyra's gaze did not waver. "Cale," she said softly, "you rejected me to protect your crown. You believed it was the only choice, and perhaps it was. But you cannot undo what has happened. You cannot undo me." Her words cut him, yet also freed something inside him. The bond pulsed with urgency, a reminder that their connection had never truly broken. Cale's eyes softened, his shoulders drooping under the weight of years of duty and pride. "You have grown stronger than I imagined," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You are not the same girl I turned away. You are a queen, and I fear that I have nothing to offer you now." Lyra studied him carefully. "You offer what matters most," she said. "The courage to see the truth, to face yourself, and to choose what kind of man you will be. That is more than many can do." The tension between them was thick, almost unbearable. Cale wanted to reach for her, to close the distance, yet he remained restrained. He was no longer an alpha in his own eyes, at least not in the way that mattered. He was just a man confronting the consequences of his choices. Riven watched silently from the edge of the clearing. He knew the bond, he knew the history, and he knew the quiet pull that drew Cale and Lyra together. And yet he did not intervene. He had guided her, protected her, and claimed her in the eyes of law, but he would not stand in the way of the bond that had persisted across kingdoms. The first real test of their meeting came sooner than expected. The wind shifted, and a howl unlike any natural sound echoed across the Dominion. Trees shook, mist swirled violently, and a sense of deep, ancient power pressed down upon them. Lyra's eyes widened. "The first howl," she whispered. Riven's hand went to his sword, though his eyes never left Lyra. "It has awakened," he said. "It demands a sacrifice, a choice, or transformation. We cannot face it lightly." Kael felt the pull of the bond stronger than ever. The first howl's energy coursed through him, almost forcing him toward her. "Then we face it together," he said firmly. Lyra studied him, her expression a mixture of surprise and calculation. "Together? You would stand with me, even now?" Kael nodded. "Even now. Because the bond does not lie. It connects us, whether I wanted it to or not. I rejected you once, but I will not run from it again." The three of them, Kael, Lyra, and Riven, prepared to face the first howl. The air grew thick with tension, and the moon overhead darkened, as though the heavens themselves held their breath. The first howl's form began to take shape, a shadowed, swirling presence, older than any crown, older than the kingdoms themselves. Its voice was not spoken, but felt, deep in the bones, like the echo of a forgotten age. "You must choose," it intoned without words. "One will kneel, one will fall, and one will transform. Only then will balance be restored." Lyra stepped forward, her chest rising and falling with determination. She knew instinctively that this was the moment that would define her, that would test every lesson Riven had taught her and every truth Kael had forced her to confront. Kael's heart tightened. He wanted to step forward and protect her, to offer himself as a sacrifice, if it meant her safety, but he knew that the first howl demanded more than fearlessness. It demanded understanding, choice, and courage. Riven remained beside Lyra, his presence steady, though he too understood that the path forward was uncertain. He could feel the pull of the bond between Kael and Lyra, and though it stirred a quiet ache within him, he knew that the moment required selflessness, not pride. Lyra closed her eyes, centering herself. She felt the bond thrumming across the distance between her and Kael, a reminder of what had been denied and what could still be reclaimed. And she felt Riven's presence, solid and protective. She understood that the threads of their fate were intertwined, each of them a part of the balance that the first howl demanded. When she opened her eyes, her voice rang clear, commanding, and unwavering. "I will not be a pawn of fear," she declared. "I will choose my path. I will not bow unless I understand. I will not yield unless I see the truth." The first howl's energy surged, pressing down on them like a storm, testing their resolve. Kael stepped forward, kneeling before her, not as a king demanding submission, but as a man acknowledging his own faults and offering himself as equal, as witness, as protector. Riven stepped back, recognizing the gesture. He understood that Lyra's power was not just her own. It was the combination of her courage, the bond with Kael, and the strength she had cultivated under his guidance. And in that moment, he knew that the old rivalries no longer mattered. The first howl's form shifted, swirling around them, its power immense yet strangely responsive. It tested, probed, and pressed, and in the center of the storm, Lyra's voice rose higher. She did not fear the test. She embraced it. And then the storm stilled. The first howl's voice, felt more than heard, seemed to recede, leaving a silence that was almost sacred. Balance had not yet been fully restored, but the first step had been taken. Lyra had proven herself, not as a girl claimed by kings, not as a pawn of prophecy, but as a queen who could command her own destiny. Kael remained kneeling, his chest heavy with relief, awe, and an emotion he could not name. The bond between them had shifted, strengthened, transformed, not by fear, not by rejection, but by choice. Lyra extended her hand to him, and he took it. Neither dominance nor submission ruled this gesture. It was acknowledgement, understanding, and the beginning of something that could grow into trust, partnership, or even love. Riven, standing beside them, allowed himself a quiet smile. He had guided her, protected her, and taught her strength. But he also understood that her destiny could not be confined by him, by Kael, or by prophecy alone. She had become her own force. The night was heavy with silver mist and silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what was to come. Lyra Vale stood atop the cliffs of the Shadow Dominion, the full moon eclipsed and glowing with an eerie pale light. Around her, the land itself hummed with power. Power that had grown from her courage, her choices, and the bonds that had tied her to two alphas. Kale Ironfang approached from the north, moving silently across the cliffs, his cloak trailing behind him. He was no longer the distant, unyielding king who had rejected her months ago. He had come not with pride, but with understanding, with humility, and with a willingness to face the truth of their bond. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, softened as they fell upon Lyra. Riven emerged from the shadows at her side, as he always had, a steady presence and protector. Though his claim to her had been public, he had never forced his will upon her, nor had he sought to contain the power that now radiated from her. He knew the night ahead would demand sacrifices none of them could yet imagine. Between them rose the first howl, its form no longer merely a whisper or a shadow, but a swirling vortex of silver and black. The air vibrated with its voice, ancient and deep, echoing through their bones. "You have arrived," it intoned. "The balance demands one choice. One alpha must kneel, one must fall, and one must transform. Only then will the eclipse be complete." Lyra's chest rose and fell. She understood now that this test was not only for her, but for Kale and Riven as well. Every bond, every decision, every heartbeat of courage would shape the outcome. Kale stepped forward first, kneeling before her not as a king demanding submission, but as a man offering his heart, acknowledging his failings and accepting his place in the path she would choose. "I will kneel," he said, "not because I am weak, but because I see the truth now. You are not mine to command. You are your own, and I have nothing to offer but honesty and loyalty." Lyra's eyes softened, and for a brief moment the tension between them melted into understanding. She reached out, touching his hand. The bond pulsed like a heartbeat, strong and steady, a reminder of what they had endured and survived. Riven took a step back, his dark eyes meeting hers. He did not speak, but his presence was a quiet acknowledgement. He had guided her, protected her, and had stepped aside when the true path demanded it. He had become a shadow to her light, not its master, and in that act of selflessness, he too completed his part of the balance. The first howl stirred, sensing the alignment. The vortex of shadow and silver twisted faster, the ground trembling beneath them. The mountains themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the final act that would define the future of both kingdoms. Lyra raised her head, lifting her arms toward the eclipsed moon. Her voice rang out, clear and commanding, cutting through the roar of the howl. "I will not bow to fear. I will not yield to the past. I will choose my own path, and I will balance the light and shadow within me. I will become the Eclipse Queen, not as a pawn, not as a prize, but as a ruler of my own destiny." The first howl screamed, a sound that shook the cliffs and rattled the stones at their feet, and yet, as her words echoed into the night, the chaos began to settle. The silver and black vortex swirled around her, drawn to her courage, her will, and her choice. Kale remained kneeling, watching her with awe. He felt the bond deepen, stronger than he had ever imagined. It was no longer a bond of longing or regret. It was a bond of respect, understanding, and connection that had been tested by rejection, rivalry, and growth. Riven stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You have become more than I imagined," he said quietly. "The Dominion, the prophecy, even the eclipse. It will follow your rule. You are the keystone that binds it all together." Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the power coursing through her. The eclipse curse, once feared as a mark of doom, now pulsed with clarity and control. She understood that her strength was not just her own. It was the combination of guidance, love, rivalry, and choice that had brought her to this moment. The first howl rose one last time, its voice a vibration in the bones, testing her resolve. One will kneel, one will fall, one will transform. Show me the truth of your heart, and the balance will be restored. Lyra opened her eyes and stepped forward, no fear in her movements, no hesitation in her choice. She knelt, not to Kale, not to Riven, not to the howl itself, but to the land, to the power that had guided her and to the destiny she had forged. The energy of the howl wrapped around her, twisting, bending, and reshaping her very being. The transformation was not violent nor cruel, but powerful. Her form shimmered. Her eyes glowed with the light of the moon and the shadow of the night intertwined. She felt herself becoming more than human, more than queen, an embodiment of balance, the eclipse made flesh. Kale and Riven watched, hearts pounding, as she rose again, the silver light of the moon bathing her in brilliance. The first howl's roar softened into a whisper, then into silence. Balance had been restored, not by domination nor by sacrifice alone, but by choice, courage, and acceptance. Lyra raised her hands, and the wind stilled. The land exhaled. The mountains seemed to bow, and the forests shimmered with quiet life. She was no longer merely Lyra Vale. She was the Eclipse Queen, the bridge between kingdoms, between light and shadow, between past regrets and future hope. Kale rose from his knees, his eyes fixed on her. He felt a rush of pride, awe, and love. Not possession, not fear, but pure admiration for the woman she had become.
You have become everything I could not see, he said softly. And more.
I am yours to stand with, if you wish it, but not to command. Lyra stepped forward and took his hand, the bond between them glowing faintly, a silver thread linking heart to heart. You stood when I needed understanding, not power, she said. That is why you may stand with me now. But I am no longer the girl you rejected. Kale nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He did not kneel again, nor did he seek to dominate. Instead, he stood as her equal, a partner, a friend, and perhaps in time something more. Riven bowed his head respectfully, a silent farewell. The dominion is yours, he said. You have earned it. I will step back, though I will always watch and protect from the shadows, should it be needed.
Lyra nodded.
She did not speak of love, rivalry, or regret. She only understood that Riven's guidance had been essential, and that his choice to step aside was a gift of trust and wisdom. The moon slowly emerged from the eclipse, its light pure and bright, reflecting off her eyes and crown. The land breathed again. The balance of shadow and light was complete. News traveled swiftly. Across Lufar and the Shadow Dominion whisper spread. The age of Alpha Kings had ended, and the reign of the Eclipse Queen had begun. Her rule was not based on fear, but on respect and understanding. Her power did not crush, but united. The kingdoms that had once been divided began to seek alliance under her guidance, drawn not by threat, but by the strength of her presence. Lyra walked through her new halls, her steps steady, her head held high. Kale remained at her side, a quiet support, understanding that the bond between them was now forged not by circumstance or obligation, but by respect, choice, and shared history. The first howl had been silenced, but its legacy remained. Lyra understood that her rule would never be easy, that challenges would come, and that the weight of both light and shadow rested upon her shoulders. Yet she also understood that she had the power to face them, not alone, nor bound by fear, but by courage and heart. One evening, standing atop the cliffs where her transformation had completed, Lyra looked at the horizon. The silver mist curled around the mountains. The forest shimmered with life, and the winds carried whispers of hope. Kale stood beside her, his hand in hers, silent but unwavering. Riven's presence was distant, protective, yet free, as it should be. Lyra whispered to the wind, to the moon, to the night itself, I will lead. I will protect. I will choose. Not as the girl who was rejected, not as a pawn of prophecy, but as the Eclipse Queen. And all who follow me will rise or fall together under the balance I now command. The moonlight glinted off her crown, silver and shadow entwined, and for the first time the kingdoms knew true peace, not forced, not fragile, but born of courage, choice, and the strength of one who had embraced her destiny fully. And somewhere in the distance, a quiet howl echoed, not of fear, but of acknowledgement. The first howl had tested, and the Eclipse Queen had triumphed. The era of darkness, fear, and divided kingdoms had ended. A new era of balance, courage, and hope had begun. Lyra Vale, the girl once rejected, had become legend.